Hey you guys, and welcome back to my Flickers of Fear movie review series. So, I kind of feel like everybody that's into horror has heard the name Jennifer Kent. She is obviously an Australian filmmaker, and she kind of burst onto the landscape back in 2014 with The Babadook, which is a great movie. I've actually reviewed it on this series as well. I really like it a lot. And she got like a huge amount of accolades for that. So, because of the, fame that brought her, she had been an actress prior to that, actually, prior to directing, rather. So, when it came time for her to do a second film, everybody in the horror community was just like kind of all buzzing about it. It's like, what is she going to come up with this time? Because her first movie was so good. But to most people's surprise, she actually ended up doing something really, really different than the Babadook, which was kind of a metaphorical, maybe supernatural kind of story, like with a monster in it, obviously. So the second movie that she made came out in 2018, and it was called The Nightingale. And The Nightingale completely dispensed with any kind of symbolic trappings or supernatural monsters or anything like that. And instead, Jennifer Kent decided that she was just going to make this completely raw, brutal, and very, very real historical horror, which kind of explores, a very violent, very, shameful period of Australian history in a way that came across as very empathetic towards its main characters, but also didn't shy away from the horror at the center of the story. Now, I will say The Nightingale is not usually tagged as a traditional horror film. I've seen it called everything from a historical drama to a psychological thriller. I've even seen it called a Western on multiple occasions. But I will say that the events that it depicts are certainly horrific and are the stuff of horror. And I mean, the movie's real long. It's like 2.5 hours, and it really just puts this really grueling, punishing nature of this narrative front and center, which I would argue makes it a horror film. I mean, I found it horrific anyway. I've also seen it called a rape revenge film, which it technically is, but it's not along the same lines as kind of more exploitation era rape revenge movies, like what people mostly think of when you say rape revenge, like something like I Spit on Your Grave or Last House on the Left from the 1970s. In the case of The Nightingale, even though the rape in the movie isn't shied away from, and I'm gonna say trigger warning, there's a lot there's a lot of rape in this movie, among other things, like other horrible things. So I'm just, telling you that right out the gate. But the rapes in the movie are not, I'm going to say they're not particularly graphic in the way that they're portrayed. They're kind of more, I don't even want to say suggestive, because obviously you can tell what's going on, but it's not like up close and personal in your, like something like I Spit on Your Grave is, because the way that they're filmed is not in any way titillating, you know what I mean? Which I kind of feel like some rape revenge movies kind of have that aspect to them, where they're kind of trying to be titillating, and this one is absolutely not. Now, that's not to say that just because the rape scenes in The Nightingale are not super graphically portrayed, that doesn't make them easy to watch, because they're absolutely not. There were some scenes in this movie that were really, really uncomfortable for me to watch. And I would argue, I mean, because rape and cruelty to animals are two things that I have a really hard time watching in horror movies. I can watch them, but it just really bothers me a lot, probably more than other things. But I would argue that despite the frequency of the scenes like this, it's not wall to wall rape or anything. It's just, but there are several scenes like that in there. But they're in there for a reason. And honestly, I would argue that the frequency of, and the barbaric nature of the attacks, that are in the movie, it kind of puts the audience in the same position as its characters, who are kind of like oppressed by these forces. They're trying to like navigate a world that is completely hostile to them, like at every turn. And that really, really comes across with this kind of punishing, kind of narrative where all of this stuff is happening to these people just like over and over again. Now, as with most of my film and book discussions, I won't be spoiling the entire plot or spoiling the ending, but I will be talking about some aspects of the story that you might not want to know beforehand if you haven't seen this movie. So kind of consider this your blanket spoiler warning. Like I said, I'm not going to tell you what happens at the end, but I will fill in a lot of the details kind of leading up to that. So the movie is set in 1825 in Van Diemen's Land, which is today known as Tasmania. And this was right before the onset of the so-called Black War, where there were these really vicious conflicts between the Aboriginal Tasmanians and the British colonizers. And it was like a really horrific, I mean, we don't really hear much about it over here because it's Australia, but it's a pretty big part of their history. So our main protagonist is a woman named Claire, and she's a young Irish woman who was arrested. I believe it was for theft. I think they do mention that. And so she's been shipped here to serve out her sentence, because they did that a lot. Like if in Ireland and England and stuff like that, if you were arrested for something, they would ship you off to Australia. So that's what happened to her. So she's basically serving out her sentence, not in jail, but like as an indentured servant, essentially. Now, she has recently been allowed to get married, and her husband have a baby. But even though she's technically served her time, like she's supposed to be done now, she should be allowed to go free. The absolute nightmare of a man who is holding her in servitude, whose name is Lieutenant Hawkins, refuses to sign her paperwork so she can move away to a farm and like start a new life with her family. So because Hawkins keeps putting her off, like blowing her off in signing this official release so she can, her sentence is done and she can go free, Claire really doesn't have much choice in doing pretty much whatever he asks her to, because if she goes somewhere, they're going to be like, oh, you're an ex-convict, where's your papers? And if she doesn't have them, she'll just be taken back, you know what I mean? So she doesn't really have much choice in the matter. So Hawkins, who is, very clearly a raging dickhole from the beginning, he makes her sing. She has a beautiful singing voice, hence the Nightingale. And she's also like serving drinks at just various gatherings for all of his leering underlings who are all like the worst. And after one of these things, like one of these occasions where she sang and like, serving drinks and people are grabbing her ass and being creepy and everything like that, Hawkins actually summons her up to his room at this inn where they're staying and rapes her. Now, she is clearly traumatized by this, as you would be, but she chooses to keep the attack to herself because she knows, realistically, that she has absolutely no power, and that telling anybody about it is just going to cause more trouble for her in the long run. Now, her husband, who is actually like a very lovely, kind man, whose name is Aiden, he suspects that Hawkins has hurt her. I think he probably suspects exactly what happened, but he doesn't want to acknowledge it, maybe. And he is actually livid that the lieutenant is giving her the runaround about her freedom. It's like, he should have signed the papers. I think it was like 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago. I can't remember what it was, but it was like a long time ago he was supposed to sign them, and he keeps putting it off. So he's really mad about it too. Her husband is, but at her insistence, she's like, please don't make a stink about it. It's like, it's going to go really badly, which, realistically, obviously it would. So he does actually stay quiet just for fear of retaliation. That is until one night when he has a little bit too much to drink and decides he's going to march right on over there to the inn and give Hawkins a piece of his mind. Obviously, this goes very, very badly. There's this huge brawl that happens between Aiden, the husband, Hawkins, and a couple of Hawkins's like subordinates. One of them is named Sergeant Ruse, and one of them is named Ensign Jago, I think is his name. Now, it so happens that while this brawl is taking place, like Hawkins's superior officer walks in and sees the fight. And so he decides then and there that he's not going to give Hawkins a promotion that Hawkins thought was in the bag, right? So in Hawkins's mind, not only have his inferiors, i.e. Aiden and Claire, mouthed off to him and like questioned his authority, but they've also now, according to him, fucked up his whole career path and denied him a promotion that he was counting on. So this pretty much causes him to become like apoplectic with rage. So later that night, after this incident, Claire and Aiden have decided, probably wisely so, that they're just going to pack their shit and get the fuck out of Dodge, because they're like, this is going to be like a huge shitstorm and we're going to come out at the very bad end of this, so let's get the fuck out of here. Papers be damned, you know what I mean? Unfortunately, however, they do not escape fast enough. Hawkins, Ruse, and Jago, like, they come into the hut. Obviously they know where it is because Hawkins set them up in that hut. So they all march into the hut with revenge on their minds. And oh boy, the next scene is probably the roughest one in the movie to watch. So what happens in this scene, basically, is that Ruse and Jago restrain Aiden, and Hawkins rapes Claire in front of him. Then Hawkins encourages Ruse to also have a go, so Ruse also rapes her in front of her husband. Hawkins then shoots Aiden dead, like on the floor of their hut, and because the baby, because remember I said they had a baby whose name is Bridget won't stop crying because obviously there are 3 dudes in the hut like attacking her parents. Hawkins basically screams for Jago to shut the baby up, at which point Jago tries to shut the baby up and it won't, so he slams the baby's head against the wall and kills the baby. So that's nice. Again, this whole scene, like, my fucking stomach was hurting because I just knew. I'm like, I kind of knew what was gonna happen, but you didn't know exactly how it was gonna happen or when it was gonna happen, and I was just like stressed out the whole fucking time. So after all of this, like, Claire sees this happen. She sees her husband get killed. She sees her baby's head get slammed against the wall. And then they knock Claire out with a rifle butt, I'm assuming they think she's dead too. And then they go on their merry way. Now, where that merry way is actually to this town called Launceston, something like that. And it's like this 3 or 4 day journey through the Tasmanian bush, which is like super unforgiving, and the British don't know their way around. Because they're going there because Hawkins still thinks he can save his promotion by going over his superior's head. So he's going to go to this town and like appeal to the superiors of his superior. So, to talk them into giving him the promotion anyway. So he gathers up his men. He hires an Aboriginal guide named Charlie because, like I said, the British don't know how to get through the bush or anything like that. They don't know the way around. And so they all set out on this trek. Now, unbeknownst to them, Claire has awakened back at the hut and realizes that her entire family has been wiped out by these evil English shitlords. Now, she does do the right thing at first, and she reports the attack to the RMP, the Royal Military Police. But since she's still technically a convict, because she hasn't got her freedom papers yet, and because, let's be honest, because she has a vagina, she's obviously making it all up. And even if she's not, the RMP seem to give less than a squirt of piss about the whole situation, and are just as obviously not going to do jack shit about it. So Claire realizes that she is pretty much on her own. So she basically asks her neighbors to bury her husband and her baby on their land, and she insists that she is going after the motherfuckers that did this, propriety and paperwork be damned. So she uses the last shilling that she has to buy the services of her own Aboriginal guide, whose name is Billy. And here's the thing that I kind of liked about this movie. Lest you think that Claire might be a little more charitable and understanding toward the oppressed Aboriginal locals, given her own situation at the bottom of the food chain, in a far more realistic fashion, the movie actually depicts her being pretty much just as much of an asshole toward Billy as the English officers toward their guide, Charlie. She calls him boy, keeps him at gunpoint at all times because she's afraid he's going to eat her. It's like all this other kind of stuff, which, like I said, would have been a lot more realistic to the time. Shit rolls downhill, you know what I mean? So, like, basically, Billy, who seems like a nice person, all he can do is just kind of shake his head in wonder at, like, and sadness at all these, like, uppity white folks that just descended on his native land and started, systematically subjugating and slaughtering all his people. So there's that. So as this long journey goes on, though, Claire and Billy start to realize that they have a lot more in common, obviously, than they initially thought. Claire is Irish, so of course she has no love for the English herself. So her and Billy start to bond over this shared hatred of the English colonizers, you know what I mean? Now, Claire actually does not tell Billy at first that she's going on a mission to kill the officers who raped her and killed her family. She just says, oh, my husband is with them and I need to get to them. Like, Billy is pretty suspicious that she's not telling him the truth. But honestly, by the time he figures out what her real end game is, he's actually kind of gotten a little bit attached to her, and he also has, along the journey, has got some reasons for revenge of his own, so they kind of join forces in a way. Now, the interesting thing about the Nightingale is that the revenge, because like I said, this is technically a rape revenge story, it doesn't play out exactly the way you think it will, which is that's a good thing. Now, some might feel, I did feel like some of the reviews that I saw, like most of the reviews of this were, were wonderful and they loved it and everything like that. It's not an easy watch, like I said, but it's a great movie. But I did see some people that complained that they thought that the resolution was unsatisfying in some way. But the thing about it, like in my mind at least, I think that was precisely the point. I'm not saying that I thought it was unsatisfying. I'm just saying that I know why it went the way it went. You know what I mean? When I said that this wasn't a standard rape revenge film, that was another thing that I meant, because in your more kind of exploitation style rape revenge movies, the revenge is meant to be like over the top, and it's supposed to be like cathartic, like for the audience, right? Like it's supposed to be this big grand finale to kind of slake their bloodlust, you know what I mean, and desire for justice, because you're seeing the victim like get back at the oppressors like in a like worse shit than what they did to her, you know what I mean? So that's kind of the point of those kind of movies. The Nightingale is a lot more complicated. It plays more with the idea, again, the more realistic idea, that vengeance might not bring you the closure or the gratification that you thought it would. And it might end up a little bit like chipping away at your humanity and possibly end up like haunting you like for the rest of your life. So as I mentioned, The Nightingale is not a fun watch at all. It is not a popcorn flick. It's not something like, hey, take a bunch of friends and go watch The Nightingale, or like for a fun drunk Saturday night or anything like that. It's really hard to sit through. I found it, some of the scenes, like very, very hard to sit through. But it is an excellent, excellent movie that really doesn't shy away from the real life horrors that plagued this time period and, have never really gone away, sadly. The acting is just incredible across the board. There's kind of like, the whole thing just has this really palpable like sense of dread. You always know wherever they are, like something bad is going to happen, but you don't know exactly what it is or where it's going to come from. And like the whole movie is like that. It's very, very stressful. Like each new interaction, like each new character that shows up, you're like, oh, what's this motherfucker going to do to them? You know what I mean? Because it's always going to be something bad. Like I said, so I wouldn't recommend the movie to anyone who just wanted a good time, because the movie is pretty soul crushing. But if you're kind of like a fan of films just as an art form in general, and films that have maybe something to say about human cruelty and vengeance and things like that, and I think particularly if you like kind of Western-ish movies with horror elements, like something like Bone Tomahawk or The Proposition or something like that, I kind of feel like this will be right up your alley. It's not exactly like those, but it's kind of in a similar ballpark. So if you liked those, you would probably like this as well. So that will do it for this Flickers of Fear. Thanks as always for watching. Please remember, like, share, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.